The first promise was never written down, never signed, and yet millions of lives would bend around it. The quiet belief that loyalty offered in desperation would one day be honored in safety. In the late 1970s, Somalia was already carrying the weight of disappointment. Independence had arrived with songs and flags, but the borders left behind by colonial rulers stitched together clans with old grievances and new ambitions. The country's long coastline, arid interior, and strategic position at the mouth of the Red Sea made it valuable to people who would never drink its bitter water or walk its dust-choked streets. For the United States, this value would become irresistible only after another ally slipped from its grasp. When Ethiopia tilted toward Moscow in 1974, Washington needed a replacement anchor in the Horn of Africa, somewhere to project power across shipping lanes and Cold War fault lines. Somalia, bruised but eager, stepped forward. Mohamed Siad Barre had seized power in a coup promising unity and scientific socialism. He spoke the language of modernization and national pride, but his rule depended on force, surveillance, and carefully balanced clan favoritism. At first, he leaned toward the Soviet Union, welcoming advisors, weapons, and ideological validation. But alliances in the Cold War were transactional, and when Somalia invaded Ethiopia's Ogaden region in 1977, hoping to reclaim land populated by ethnic Somalis, Moscow chose Addis Ababa. Barre was left exposed, humiliated, and furious. Within months, he expelled Soviet personnel and turned to Washington. American officials saw opportunity where Somalis saw survival. Airfields, ports, listening posts, these were the words whispered in classified cables. Barre, a sun-scorched port on the Gulf of Aden, suddenly mattered more than villages collapsing under drought. Arms shipments resumed under a different flag. Aid flowed unevenly, strategically. Barre became once again a client, tolerated not for virtue, but for usefulness. In Mogadishu, the promise was felt differently. To ordinary Somalis, America was not a doctrine or a strategy. It was an idea carried by rumors and radio broadcasts. It was the place that supported their government when others abandoned it, the place whose aid trucks sometimes arrived when crops failed. Barre spoke of partnership and sovereignty in the same breath. Few noticed the quiet trade-offs. Human rights reports softened, abuses overlooked, dissent reframed as instability. The state grew harder as it grew more dependent. By the late 1980s, the Cold War was losing its heat, and Somalia's value began to fade. Barre's regime, weakened by corruption and rebellion, no longer delivered what Washington needed. Aid slowed, attention drifted. When clan-based insurgencies surged, there was no rescue plan waiting. In January 1991, Barre fled Mogadishu under cover of chaos, leaving behind a country without a government, a currency, or a referee for its conflicts. What followed was not a single collapse, but a series of unravelings. Ministries emptied, soldiers sold their uniforms, militias arose where institutions had fallen. Famine crept in alongside gunmen, and children learned the sound of hunger and shell fire at the same time. In Washington, Somalia returned to relevance only when images of starving bodies reached American living rooms. Humanitarian concern mixed with geopolitical anxiety, and in December 1992, U.S. troops landed on Somali beaches under a mission framed as mercy. For Somalis on the ground, the arrival was confusing and hopeful all at once. Foreign soldiers brought food and order, but also fear. They did not speak the language of clan or history. They operated on timelines measured in months, not generations. The mission shifted, quietly at first, from feeding the hungry to reshaping power. In October 1993, the streets of Mogadishu turned deadly. Helicopters fell, bodies were dragged. The images burned themselves into American memory, and the decision was made with stunning speed. The United States would leave. To Somalis, the departure felt like abandonment replayed. The promise, never spoken but deeply felt, seemed broken again. Those who had cooperated with American forces were left to navigate the consequences alone. Warlords tightened their grip. The state remained a ghost. It was during these years that the first large wave of Somalis began arriving in the United States. Some came through refugee programs, others through family reunification, all carrying fragments of the same story. They arrived in Minnesota, Ohio, Washington, Georgia, places chosen not for familiarity, but for possibility. America, to them, was still tied to that earlier alliance, to the aid, to the brief moment when the world had paid attention. It was the country that had once treated Somalia as important. Life in the United States demanded reinvention. Parents worked night shifts, while children translated mail and memories. Mosques formed in rented storefronts. Clan identities softened but did not disappear. The past was never far away, carried in phone calls, remittances, and the constant worry about relatives back home. Many Somali-Americans believed, quietly, that their presence in the United States was part of an unfinished exchange, that loyalty given during the Cold War, cooperation during intervention, and years of alignment had earned them a place. But history was still moving, and its direction was changing. After September 11, 2001, Somalia re-entered American strategic thinking through a different lens. No longer a failed ally, it became a suspected vacuum, a space where threats might grow unchecked. Somalia's lack of central authority, once tolerated as tragic, was now seen as dangerous. Intelligence reports mentioned training camps, shadowy figures, ungoverned spaces. The language hardened. Inside the United States, Muslim communities felt the shift almost immediately. Surveillance expanded, immigration systems tightened. The unspoken trust between refugee communities and the government grew thinner. For Somali-Americans, the collision was deeply personal. They had fled a country where the state watched too closely, only to find themselves questioned, monitored, and occasionally accused in their new home. Still, many believed this phase would pass. America, after all, had once stood with Somalia when it mattered. That memory lingered, especially among elders who remembered Barre's alliance and the aid convoys of the 1980s. The belief persisted that history created obligations, even if they were not written into law. The 2016 election shattered that assumption. Donald Trump did not invent suspicion toward immigrants, nor did he begin America's long struggle with identity and power. But he spoke aloud what had often been coded, amplified what had once been cautious. Immigration was no longer framed as a system to manage, but as a threat to repel. Refugees became symbols, not people. Muslim identity became shorthand for danger in political speeches that reached millions. For Somali-Americans, the rhetoric landed with particular force. They were visible, concentrated, and politically active in certain regions. Their history with the United States was long, complicated, and deeply intertwined with American decisions abroad. Yet that history found no place in slogans or speeches. The Cold War alliance, the humanitarian intervention, the years of resettlement, all of it vanished behind a single word: security. Travel bans followed, reshaping families overnight. Grandparents were stranded. Weddings became long-distance ceremonies. Legal status, once assumed stable, felt suddenly fragile. The old promise that cooperation and alignment would be remembered now seemed naive. What made the collision so sharp was not only policy, but contrast. Somali-Americans carried a memory of America as a power that made deals, built alliances, and accepted responsibility for the consequences of its choices. The Trump-era vision of America rejected that continuity. It treated history as disposable, obligation as weakness, and complexity as inconvenience. The differences were not merely political, they were historical. Somali-Americans remembered a United States that had sought influence through partnership, even flawed partnership. They remembered American officials who negotiated, compromised, and invested in long-term presence. Trump's America spoke instead of walls, bans, and exits. Where one era emphasized leverage through engagement, the other prized dominance through distance. This was not simply a disagreement over immigration numbers or security protocols. It was a rupture between two understandings of how power had been exercised and what it owed in return. Somali-Americans saw themselves as products of a shared history, drawn into American orbit by strategic necessity, shaped by interventions and withdrawals, and finally settled on American soil as a consequence of those choices. The Trump administration treated them as arrivals without context, strangers whose past did not matter. Behind closed doors, the calculus was different. Advisors spoke of voters, optics, and risk. Somalia was rarely mentioned by name except as a warning. The Cold War files stayed sealed, the humanitarian debates archived. The small decisions that had once bound the two societies, arms shipments approved, ports leased, refugees admitted, were absent from the conversation. Yet history does not disappear simply because it is ignored. It accumulates in communities, in expectations passed down, in the shock that comes when an assumed relationship is denied. For Somali-Americans, the collision was not sudden. It was the final realization that the unspoken contract, the belief that past loyalty would guarantee future belonging, had expired without notice. In Somalia, the consequences of earlier choices continued to unfold. The absence of a strong state invited external interventions, regional rivalries, and internal fractures. Each development sent new ripples through the diaspora, reinforcing the sense that lives on both sides of the ocean were still connected by decisions made decades earlier in distant rooms. The story is not one of villains and victims arranged neatly across borders. It is a story of overlapping fears: American fear of vulnerability, Somali fear of abandonment. It is a story of power exercised without foresight and loyalty offered without guarantees. Above all, it is a story of how history, when treated as finished business, returns as conflict. The collision between Somali-Americans and Trump was never just about one administration or one set of policies. It was the moment when two versions of the past confronted each other. One remembered, one denied. On one side stood a community shaped by alliances, interventions, and promises implied if not spoken. On the other stood a vision of America that refused inheritance, severed continuity, and claimed the right to redefine itself without accounting for who had been pulled along in earlier chapters. The first promise, unwritten and unacknowledged, had finally come due.